Mitul, we've got a couple of close calls today. Let's start out with the ECB. What are they going to do?
Well, I think the ECB will stay on hold. There's not much of an expectation that they will raise rates today. But what will be very important is, of course, the language of Jean-Claude Trichet in the press statement. And whether he says in the statement that they are being strongly vigilant or whether they're closely monitoring inflation and the economic outlook. So I think depending on what he says will give us very strong clues as to whether the ECB hikes next in June or July.
Right, and if they don't hike today, so you're saying June or July, where do you expect the ECB to be by year end?
Well, by year end, we're looking for at least another 50 basis points of rate hikes from the ECB. So our view is that we won't see a hike in today, we won't see a hike in June, but there is a strong likelihood that we'll see a hike in July, followed by another one perhaps later in the year. So we're not talking about an aggressive stance of rate hikes, but at least another 50 basis points, 25 basis point hikes for the rest of the year. Now, the thing is, the market's pretty much priced that in anyway, so I don't think it's going to be a big shock if the ECB delivers on this.
So, Mitul, why is it that the ECB seems so much more hawkish than the Bank of England? Given Europe's problems, can they not afford to let the inflation target slide a bit? I mean, we're only talking about 2.8% inflation last month.
Well, I think the ECB is very cognizant of their credibility and any damage to their credibility. If they did let inflation slide, it would be seen as very negative, of course, for them. Of course, there is some countries in Europe, as we know, they're doing very well. Germany in Northern Europe is doing very well. Germany, I think, is very keen for higher rates, but of course, Southern Europe isn't. So the job of the ECB is very, very difficult. And added to this complication for the ECB is the fact that the euro is so strong, which I think is compounding the negative impact on the European economy. So for the ECB, it's a much tougher job than the Bank of England. The Bank of England have to worry about one economy rather than 16 economies. And I think the Bank of England still take this stance that they believe inflation pressures are going to be transitory and inflation will ultimately come back down again.
But why wouldn't they be transitory in Europe? I mean, I'm curious about what happens here if this rate tightening ends up being a mistake. What are the consequences for Europe?
Well, I think it could be, if it turns to a mistake, of course, it could be quite disastrous. As I said, the problems in Europe in terms of divergence in growth have not gone away. In fact, recent evidence suggests that divergence in growth is widening. And, at a time when peripheral Europe is still struggling, that growth, recovery in growth is still a long way off, and we're still seeing austerity measures being implemented across Southern Europe, it is really tough to face higher interest rates and, in particular, a stronger euro. So it could be very, very negative if it proves that the ECB are overzealous in tightening policy in the next few months.
And with regards to the Bank of England, how long can they continue to sit on their hands here?
Well, I think they have a little bit of time. It is difficult in a way because the inflation pressures still remain pretty significant. Of course, the inflation is twice the Bank of England's target. But at the same time, some of the growth numbers have been quite weak recently, including a PMI number that came out this week. And there'll be a lot of focus, of course, on the services PMI today. But it does make it difficult for the Bank of England to hike at a time when some of the economic data are still coming in quite soft. So I think they'll sit on their hands at least for the next few months, but there is still a likelihood that we may see a hike prior to year end.
All right, Mitul Kotecha, we've got to leave it there from Credit Agricole. Thanks very much for being with us.